So if you stand by any holy site in the world for about half an hour, you'll learn that sometimes a building is more than a building. A stone is more than just a stone. It can hold memory, symbolism, emotional and spiritual meaning. And perhaps those of you who recently or at some point traveled to Israel-Palestine can relate. In 2010, I got the chance to visit Jerusalem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is built on the traditional site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. This site has been adorned with gold, religious images, candles, decor. It's the kind of place that attracts many pilgrims. And I confess that personally, I am skeptical by nature, and I don't tend to find such places awe-inspiring. So the site itself, not to mention its constant religious infighting and uncertain archaeological basis, actually did not give me warm feelings of awe and praise. But my husband John, who was then living just across the border in Palestine at the time, had brought me there, and he shared that his own potential skepticism aside, he liked to visit sometimes just to watch the pilgrims, to see how much the place meant to others, to watch as they traveled from afar to kiss the stones that represented the Jesus who meant so much to them. And after he said that, I watched a woman I'll never forget just weeping as she stood in front of the site of the tomb. That response moved me more than any stone I saw there. So yes, sometimes a stone is more than just a stone. It can inspire and reverberate, reflect meaning to oneself and to others. And it's not just these historical holy sites. So many feel a sense of peace or awe or holiness when they enter a cathedral, whether in Europe or downtown Washington. Or so many look at the Capitol building or the Lincoln Memorial and see more than marble columns, but a system of freedom and liberty which our veterans fought to preserve. And so many stand back and look even at their own homes, sometimes, and see more than a home, see a hope and a life they've built and a place they've helped to provide for their families. And so many look at a church's sanctuary, organ, bells, Sunday school classrooms, not only as structures and investments, but as reminders of a place that is haunted with memory and holy experience and longing. Beautiful stones, beautiful reminders of life and blessings that we have received, beautiful affirmations that God is among us, providing for us, redeeming us. And all of this helps me to begin to enter the world of our disciples as they stood there looking at the temple with Jesus that day. Because again, when I first read about the crowds oohing and aahing at the temple's beautiful stones, I'm tempted to dismiss them as shallow or missing the point. But stones are more than stones, and I understand that they likely felt a deeper meaning in this large, beautiful representation of their faith and community and history. In fact, Herod II had reconstructed the temple, completing it just 5 or 10 years before Jesus was born. And our first century historian, Josephus, recounts that it was absolutely breathtaking. It had been expanded greatly in size to rival Roman and Athenian buildings of the day. Its stones were huge. Its outside walls were covered in gold so brilliant it could blind you. To some onlookers, I imagine it represented both continuity with 500 years of Jewish worshipers and also a bold, strong, hopeful new symbol that God was still here now, still working in the lives of the people now, even amidst occupation by the Roman Empire. But the trouble is, stones will fall. That's what Jesus has to remind the disciples and reminds us, no matter how great, no matter how beautiful, no matter how imbued with meaning, stones will fall. Jesus puts it rather starkly. As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left on another, all will be thrown down. Jesus might seem to be going into one of his apocalyptic rants about the end of the world and wars and insurrections, but at least in part he's talking about very human, political, earthly realities. Jerusalem is already threatened by empires on every side, and it's only a matter of time before it will be surrounded by armies, as Jesus says. The siege of Jerusalem, in fact, would happen about 40 years after Jesus had this conversation, around the year 70, when a Roman response to a Jewish uprising led to the destruction of this very temple. And I don't know if it matters whether Jesus was prophesying that specific event or speaking in generalities, but the point is, Jesus knows that we can't count on stones, traditions, outer manifestations of security and God's presence, not even the beautiful ones that we love. And the disciples know it too. Isn't it interesting that when Jesus tells them the stones will all be thrown down, they don't seem surprised, they don't protest, they just say, when? They know stones fall. We know stones fall. We know that even the symbols they represent can be threatened. Temple stones can be thrown down by empires and wars, in this case. Church buildings can fall into disrepair. Capitol buildings can be attacked. Homes can be lost to termites or inflation, and the happy families they represent can seem to shift or shatter. And I wonder if Jesus was thinking about all this when he responded to those pilgrims. I wonder if he meant not to ruin their day with a pessimistic outlook, but to point to them to something deeper. It's so easy for our trust in God to become lodged in particular beautiful place of worship or a particular way of practicing faith, and it's so easy for our best impulses of love and community to become lodged in a particular way of envisioning family and friendship. But lodging hopes in such places is risky. And not just because stones fall, but because often they were never really set up for everyone to benefit. The temple, just as Jesus pointed out to the disciples right before this conversation, was a place where rich people were throwing huge sums of money, while poor widows were dropping their last 2 coins in generosity. But in the end, was it really serving the widows? Now, this might seem like a strange segue, but this all got me thinking about Disney's 2021 movie, Encanto. Encanto, for those of you who haven't had the privilege I've had of seeing it multiple times in the past week, also tells of the falling of a beautiful, symbolic building in which many hopes have been placed. The Madrigal family lives in a magical home that was given to their matriarch years ago as a miraculous gift in a time of need. And so it has become a symbol of all they've been through, of the place and community that has sustained them through the years. But cracks appear in the home, literal cracks, and also cracks in the family relationships, and it becomes apparent that the way they are clinging to this home and to this family and to this history is really hurting them. Especially it is hurting their youngest generation, who are all giving their utmost to try and preserve the beautiful stones of family traditions. And especially it is hurting their marginalized members, symbolized by Uncle Bruno of "We Don't Talk About Bruno" fame. But the thing is, we need to talk about the Brunos. We need to talk about the children who bear the pressures of holding up beautiful stones for their families and societies, because in Encanto, the home ultimately falls. in time for them to learn to rebuild in a way that would serve everyone. And I think probably Herod's temple in Jesus' day was also refurbished not actually to honor God or benefit all people, but to wow and appease the powerful. And perhaps there are other traditions or beautiful relics in our lives that are no longer serving the needs of children, of those on the edges of society, and perhaps not even our own needs, despite the memory and tradition they may stir up in us. What if the government structure we hold to because donkeys and elephants have always symbolized democracy is actually harming our future? What if the warm fuzzies we get from our homes and neighborhoods and lives and realities cloud the very complicated ways that they contribute to a society that's unequal? What if the Sunday schools and youth groups and even mission projects we love and value and reminisce about are not meeting today's needs? These are just questions I don't know the answers. I do know that whatever the answers, a long discussion of a falling house of worship is a strange place to come to on a stewardship season Sunday when we're thinking about why we offer gifts of time and labor and mission and personhood to the church. But we're really here together today and every week because Jesus knew a different way, another way. Jesus knew that even as stones fall, God is always doing a new and life-giving thing, even in destruction, even in the midst of death. And that brings me to our Old Testament lesson for today, this poem from Isaiah written 500 years before Jesus that gives us a glimpse of the things Jesus knew so well. Isaiah proclaims that joy and delight are the real future for those who cling to God, not falling stones. Isaiah proclaims that long lives of well-being and peace, labor that is justly compensated, a God who anticipates our real needs even before we are aware of them, even, for example, when we are still hung up on nostalgia about the beautiful stones. Isaiah proclaims this God who is working on something so much more organic and growing, a new heavens and a new earth, a people that will grow like a tree. And as far off as it sometimes seems, this passage is a reminder that this new creation is coming regardless of our efforts. We don't have to give away all our money or figure out the answers to life's perplexing questions or solve all the problems of our homes and families and societies. It is coming. It is coming because God is good, because God makes life even in destruction, because God always finds a little foothold for hope and mercy. And this is the good news that Jesus told. It is the gospel that we hold to. It is coming, and so if the stones of our nostalgic history are falling anyway, and if the new creation is coming anyway, I guess we have a choice. We can keep clinging to those beautiful symbols and memories, or we can honor that but still participate in something more. Working alongside God in co-creating this world that will not birth children for calamity of climate change or war, that will not put coins in a treasury just to hold on to a feeling of something, but to seek in very real ways the new creation that spreads God's abundance to all who are yet to come. And this hope of new creation brings me actually back full circle to when I was in Jerusalem in 2010. And just a few days after having visited that well-adorned, beautiful church of the Holy Sepulchre, I found myself in an outdoor worship service on Easter morning on the top of a Mount of Olives, looking down into the valleys of occupied Palestine. That morning, this very passage from Isaiah was read. Be glad and rejoice forever in what I am creating. They shall build houses and live in them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity. And as I heard those words, I couldn't help but think that while tourists flocked to these beautiful holy sites, there were hundreds of thousands of people just down in those valleys who had built homes and then had to flee for war to refugee camps and not live in them. There were so many people who had planted olive groves and then not been able to harvest or eat them. There were so many parents who felt like every child was born to calamity. And it could be hard to hold to that vision, to see the hope. But the people who were worshiping that morning on the Mount of Olives were choosing not to worship among old stones, but on a hill with a vision of something different. They were choosing to plant their lives, even in a place of destruction and conflict and poverty, and to proclaim and work for peace, for something different, for new creation. They were choosing to be what Christ calls us to be, co-laborers and co-creators with a God who is always working to make abundance for all. And so in our church and in our homes, in our families and in our society and in our lives, may we also hold to that vision even amidst what falling stones we may see. May we live in the hope and make space for all people, just as Jesus did and called us to do.